She was turned away at the doors of Bellcrest Academy of Music because of her thrift store clothes and the worn-out guitar case that looked like it had traveled through decades of hardship. Audition slots are reserved for serious musicians, not hobbyists, the receptionist said, barely glancing up from her screen. A group of students in designer clothes snickered. They're letting anyone in for tours now. Meredith said nothing. She simply produced her invitation letter and walked through their laughter, through their judgment, until a single song silenced them all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Bellcrest Academy of Music stood like a fortress of artistic excellence, its historic stone facade overlooking the shores of Lake Michigan. Sunlight glinted off its massive windows, each pane a witness to generations of musical genius nurtured within its hallowed halls. Inside, the air hummed with prestige and privilege. Every practice room showcased emerging stars, industry prodigies, and children of legendary musicians. Italian marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and the walls displayed gold-framed portraits of alumni who had conquered Carnegie Hall, dominated Billboard charts, and collected Grammys like souvenirs. Membership at Bellcrest wasn't merely about tuition, which exceeded the annual salary of most families, but about bloodlines and connections. The waiting list stretched for years, except for those with the right surname or sponsorship from someone influential enough to bend the rules. Outside the grand entrance, a velvet rope separated worthy applicants from tourists and dreamers. Today, Meredith Wilson stood on the wrong side. Her faded jeans and simple blue sweater a stark contrast to the curated fashion parading past her. At 25, Meredith carried a quiet intensity that could easily be overlooked. Her natural beauty required no embellishment, chestnut hair falling in soft waves around a face that held both vulnerability and resolve. Her green eyes held a depth that spoke of stories untold, songs unheard. Over her shoulder hung an ancient guitar case, its leather cracked and peeling, held together with faded stickers and what appeared to be electrical tape. Her grandfather, Jackson Wilson, had been a session guitarist who'd played behind some of the greatest voices of his generation, though his name rarely appeared in credits. He taught Meredith to play from the moment her fingers could stretch across the frets, showing her that music wasn't about fame, but about finding truth in melody. After his passing, Meredith had promised to honor his legacy. But the crowd gathering for Bellcrest's annual songwriting competition saw only an outsider with no understanding of their world. The receptionist, Vivian Taylor, with her immaculate bob and designer glasses, blocked Meredith's path at the registration desk. "This is the region's most prestigious songwriting competition," she said, her voice deliberately loud enough to draw attention. "Participation is by invitation only, and I'm certain you haven't received one." She gestured dismissively at Meredith's guitar case, eyes lingering judgmentally on the fraying strap. A student nearby, Blake Montgomery, son of a record executive and Bellcrest's golden boy, leaned against the marble column, smirking. "They've started letting in the cleaning staff's relatives now?" he called out, triggering a wave of laughter from his entourage. Meredith's fingers reached for the letter in her pocket, a worn envelope from Professor Richard Hayes, the aging composition teacher whose ear for authentic talent remained unmatched despite the Academy's increasing focus on pedigree over passion. "I have an invitation," she said, her voice steady yet soft. Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in disbelief as the scanner confirmed the letter's authenticity. "There must be some mistake," she muttered, but reluctantly waved Meredith through, adding under her breath, "Professor Hayes and his charity cases." As Meredith entered the grand auditorium, the Academy's live stream cameras swiveled toward her, broadcasting her entrance to thousands of alumni, industry professionals, and aspiring musicians watching online. Phones immediately illuminated as students began posting in real time. "Thrift shop songwriter," one caption read, zooming in on her worn boots. "Participation trophy entrant," another commented, shared widely by the son of a Grammy-winning producer. Alexandria Walsh, Bellcrest's star vocalist, stood tall, her voice carrying across the room. Look at her thinking she can compete with actual musicians. She gestured toward Meredith's simple attire. "This is Bellcrest, not an open mic at some coffee shop." The audience laughed, their mockery a calculated performance for the cameras. "Bet she borrowed that invitation," a boy shouted, "or it's a forgery." Meredith's expression remained unchanged, her green eyes focused ahead. But the live stream caught a glimpse of an older woman watching from a small apartment, Meredith's mother, whose face reflected every barb thrown at her daughter. The auditorium was a cathedral to musical achievement. Acoustic panels, shaped like sound waves, lined walls, designed to perfect every note. Digital displays showed contestant profiles and previous winners, while the judges' platform stood elevated, like a modern Olympus where musical gods determined mortal fates. Students lounged in premium seats, expensive instruments beside them like status symbols. Blake Montgomery sprawled in the front row, his custom Martin guitar, worth more than most cars, propped carelessly against his chair. Even the janitorial staff gets audition slots now, he remarked, loud enough for the nearby microphones to catch. "What's next? Delivery drivers?" His circle of privileged peers laughed on cue, their eyes dismissing Meredith's worn jeans and simple sweater. "What's she going to play? Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" One girl with diamond-studded earbuds quipped. Meredith stepped past them, her face serene as she found her assigned seat in the back corner, far from the premium spots reserved for favorites. A composition instructor, Dr. Eliza Winters, approached with a clipboard and a smile that failed to reach her eyes. "This competition sets the standard for emerging songwriters," she said, her British accent emphasizing each syllable like a verdict. "Bellcrest discovers voices that define generations, not enthusiastic hobbyists." Her gaze flicked to Meredith's guitar case, where a coffee stain marked the corner. "There's a lovely community center program across town that might be more appropriate for your skill level." The surrounding students nodded in agreement, several clapping softly at this pointed suggestion. "It would save you the embarrassment," Dr. Winters added, her words precision-crafted to cut. Meredith adjusted her guitar strap, her green eyes briefly reflecting a well of determination beneath her calm exterior. The audience watching the live stream began posting frantically, their outrage at her treatment building with each passing moment. In the front row, Alexandria Walsh adjusted her posture, her designer outfit and professionally styled hair creating a deliberate contrast to Meredith's simplicity. "Some of us have trained since childhood under world-class mentors," she said, her voice carrying with practiced projection. "This isn't some charity showcase for amateurs with entry-level instruments." The competition's social media feed flooded with comments. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Who let her in? Does she even know music theory?" The head judge, conductor Nicholas Reed, a titan of the classical world transitioning to mainstream prominence, observed Meredith with undisguised skepticism. "Have you even performed before? An audience larger than your bathroom mirror?" he asked bluntly, drawing appreciative chuckles from those eager for his approval. Meredith met his gaze, her voice soft but clear. "I'll manage," she replied, the brevity carrying more weight than a defense ever could. The audience watching online leaned forward, sensing the brewing storm beneath her composed exterior. Julian Hayes was Bellcrest's reigning champion for 3 consecutive years. At 27, with tousled dark hair and features that had graced music magazine covers, he embodied everything the Academy celebrated. His family's music publishing empire ensured his compositions received premium placement in films and streaming playlists, and his custom-designed wardrobe made him instantly recognizable. He took the stage for his performance slot, his movements confident, his presence commanding. His original composition, an intricate melody that seamlessly blended classical foundations with modern elements, filled the auditorium. The digital scoreboard flashed as the judges entered their ratings. 9, 7, 9, 8, 9, 9, 9, 8, nearly perfect. His grouping of notes tight as a professional recording. The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet as Julian took a practiced bow. He turned, spotting Meredith in the back, and his smile transformed into something predatory. "If your song scores within 2 points of mine," he announced, his voice amplified by the microphone he hadn't relinquished, "I'll personally sponsor your tuition." The crowd murmured in excitement. "But when you fail," he continued, "you'll acknowledge publicly that some people simply don't belong in professional music." The audience cheered, entertained by what they viewed as guaranteed humiliation. Julian approached Meredith as he exited the stage, leaning close. "No pressure, coffee shop girl." Meredith didn't flinch. She nodded once, her silence more powerful than any retort. The mockery intensified. As Meredith's performance slot approached, Blake Montgomery sauntered over, his expensive watch catching the light. "That guitar looks older than my grandmother," he sneered, his voice carrying to nearby live-stream microphones. "Probably sounds like a dying cat." He flicked a guitar pick at her feet, landing deliberately on her worn boots. "Pick it up, amateur. You might need it when your strings break mid-song." The crowd laughed as phones recorded the interaction. Alexandria adjusted her diamond earrings, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "You're embarrassing yourself by staying, honey. Talent isn't something you can thrift shop for." Professor Hayes, the elderly composition teacher who had invited Meredith, watched from the sidelines, his face troubled as his colleagues joined the mockery rather than stopping it. Conductor Reed approached, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Bellcrest has produced 12 Grammy winners in the past decade," he stated, his tone condescending. "We don't have time to humor tourists with guitars." Meredith's hands moved with quiet efficiency as she tuned her instrument, her face betraying nothing. Her mother, watching the live stream from her hospital bed where she was recovering from surgery, wiped tears as each insult landed on her daughter. The Academy's social media platforms became battlegrounds, posts multiplying. "Grandma's guitar girl needs to go home," read one with a close-up of Meredith's worn case. "Faker exposed," declared another, shared by an influencer whose father owned a record label. Blake stood dramatically, projecting to the back row. "Why is she even here? Did someone leave the service entrance unlocked?" The crowd roared, their elitism a fortress surrounding Meredith. A student in designer clothes, Zoe Parker, dropped her program at Meredith's feet with deliberate carelessness. "Pick that up too while you're at it," she called out. The paper slid across the polished floor. But Meredith remained focused, checking. Her guitar's tuning, her green eyes fixed on some distant point, as though seeing something no one else could perceive. The insults crescendoed as Meredith's performance slot arrived. A retired virtuoso, now on Bellcrest's board, leaned toward Conductor Reed, speaking with theatrical volume. "This is what happens when we allow exceptions to our standards," he lamented. "No technique, no training, no business being here." The crowd hummed in agreement, cameras flashing as Meredith stood, her simplicity magnified under the sophisticated lighting designed to highlight every imperfection. Alexandria rose dramatically, her custom-made acoustic guitar inlaid with mother-of-pearl catching the light. "You're making a spectacle of yourself and devaluing our craft," she declared. "Every serious musician here has invested thousands of hours in training." Blake added from his seat, "Bet she doesn't even know what key she's playing in. Probably thinks a minor scale is about size." Laughter swelled through the auditorium, each barb sharper than the last. Meredith's fingers brushed the worn wood of her grandfather's guitar, a slight tremor the only indication of her awareness, but her face remained composed, her silence an island in their storm. Julian's supporters occupied the front rows, their polite applause for other competitors transforming to dismissive whispers as Meredith approached the stage. The previous performer, a conservatory student with classical training, had scored 8. 9, earning respectful acknowledgement from the judges. Julian stood near the judges' table, his posture relaxed, confidence emanating from every perfectly tailored inch. "Good luck, uninvited," he called, his words wrapped in false politeness, his eyes challenging her to break. The live stream comments multiplied. "This will be a train wreck. Can't wait to see her crash and burn. Who let this nobody in?" Meredith stepped onto the stage, the spotlight harsh and unforgiving. The audience settled into an expectant hush, phones raised to capture what they anticipated would be a moment of humiliating failure. She adjusted the microphone stand, its height set for performers much taller than her modest stature. The auditorium held its breath, the collective anticipation of disaster almost palpable. Conductor Reed glanced at his watch, making his impatience obvious to all watching. Meredith positioned her grandfather's guitar, its worn body cradled against her like an old friend rather than an instrument. She closed her eyes briefly, and in that moment of stillness, something in the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. Her fingers touched the strings, and the first notes emerged, clear, controlled, and carrying a complexity that immediately silenced the front row. The melody wasn't merely played, it was born as though the song had always existed somewhere in the universe, waiting for Meredith to give it form. Her voice joined the guitar, not powerful in the traditional sense, but authentic and emotionally precise, finding notes between notes, expressing emotions between emotions. The song told a story of loss and perseverance, the lyrics painting vivid images of ordinary struggle transformed into extraordinary resilience. The digital scoring system, designed to measure technical perfection, began registering unprecedented numbers. 9, 8 for composition structure. The judges exchanged glances, their practiced neutrality slipping. Meredith's eyes remained half-closed, her focus internal rather than performative. The second verse expanded the melody, introducing haunting harmonies, created by a single voice that seemed impossible to produce without technology. 9. 9 for vocal technique. Blake's smirk faded, his hand unconsciously lowering his phone. Alexandria's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her armrest, knuckles whitening. The chorus arrived like a revelation, building to an emotional crescendo that caused the acoustic sensors in the ceiling to register frequencies rarely achieved in the auditorium. 9. 9 for emotional impact. Julian's confident stance stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he recognized something beyond his carefully crafted skill, something authentic and untamed by conventional training. The bridge introduced a guitar technique that blended classical finger-picking with innovations that made several guitar instructors lean forward, trying to deconstruct what they were witnessing. 10 for innovation. The crowd's expressions transformed in waves, from mockery to surprise, from surprise to recognition, from recognition to awe. Phones lowered one by one as the audience abandoned documentation in favor of experience. The final verse revealed the song's true depth, a meditation on being underestimated and finding power in invisibility. Meredith's voice found notes that made the most cynical listener feel exposed, as though she sang not to them, but about them. 10 for lyrical content. As the final notes resonated through the auditorium, a silence descended, pure and profound. The digital board flashed her aggregate score, 992, surpassing Julian's 98 and establishing a new competition record. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Professor Hayes, the elderly composition teacher, rose from his seat, tears streaming unashamedly down his lined face. He began to applaud, slow, deliberate, the sound echoing in the silence like a proclamation. One by one, others joined, hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction. The applause swelled, filling the space that moments ago had housed only contempt. Students who had mocked her stood, their earlier cruelty transformed to reluctant respect. Conductor Reed remained seated until the last possible moment, before propriety demanded he acknowledge greatness, regardless of its source. Julian stood frozen, his carefully constructed world shifting beneath him as he witnessed what raw talent unchained from tradition could accomplish. The live stream exploded, comments flooding in from around the world. "Who is she? That voice? I've never heard anything like it. The next legend just arrived." Meredith lowered her guitar, her serene expression unchanged, neither seeking nor needing their validation. She had come to honor her grandfather's teaching that music wasn't about applause, but about truth. The truth had been spoken. The rest was just noise. As the applause finally subsided, Meredith spoke for the first time since her arrival, her voice soft, yet carrying to every corner of the now silent auditorium. "My grandfather played guitar for 40 years, she said simply. "He taught me that. Music isn't owned by institutions or credentials. It belongs to whoever loves it enough to listen beyond the surface." The crowd parted as she walked from the stage, heads bowing not in condescension, but in a recognition of something authentic in a world of careful construction. Professor Hayes approached, his aged hand trembling as he reached for Meredith's. "In 50 years of teaching," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I've never heard such truth in music." One by one, the judges acknowledged what they had witnessed. Not merely talent, but something rarer, artistry untamed by convention. Alexandria stood silent, her perfectly crafted image suddenly feeling hollow beside Meredith's unvarnished authenticity. Blake's phone remained lowered, his typical social media commentary forgotten as he processed what he'd experienced. Julian Hayes approached last, his confident stride replaced by something more hesitant. "I've never been so wrong," he admitted, loud enough for nearby microphones to capture. "Your song wasn't just better, it was transformative." The crowd watched as Julian's arrogance dissolved, replaced by something rarely seen in Bellcrest's competitive halls, genuine admiration. His eyes, once sharp with challenge, now followed Meredith with curiosity and something deeper. Conductor Reed announced formally, "The competition record now belongs to Meredith Wilson." He gestured to the digital display where her score glowed. Her composition will be featured in our annual showcase and recommended to industry partners. The live stream audience witnessed Julian's approach to Meredith after the formal announcements concluded. "I've been performing my entire life," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance, "but I've never created anything as real as what you just did." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to understand how you did it, if you'd consider talking about it sometime." Meredith's smile emerged, slight but genuine, illuminating her face in a way that caught Julian off guard, his composer's confidence faltering before her natural grace. "Coffee might be a place to start," she replied, her voice carrying neither resentment nor triumph, just simple acceptance. The Academy's hierarchy underwent a seismic shift that afternoon. Blake Montgomery retreated to the background, his expensive guitar suddenly less impressive than the soul it failed to express. Alexandria packed away her perfect technique, confronted by the reality that technical excellence without emotional truth was ultimately forgettable. The live stream trended globally, Meredith Wilson becoming a symbol of authentic artistry, breaking through institutional barriers. The retired virtuoso who had mocked her approached with a formal bow, offering an apology that disappeared beneath. The rising tide of celebration. Zoe Parker, who had dropped her program at Meredith's feet, slipped away, her designer outfit providing no shield against the shame of recognizing her own cruelty. Bellcrest's elite faced a reckoning, their exclusivity, challenged by a woman whose grandfather had taught her that music's purpose was communication, not decoration. Julian lingered as the crowd dispersed, his carefully constructed image transformed by curiosity, then admiration. "I've been playing music my whole life," he confessed later as they sat in a quiet corner of the reception. "But I don't think I've ever really listened until today." Meredith's smile deepened, her green eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. "Most people don't," she said, a simple truth that redefined everything he thought he knew about his craft. As weeks passed, Meredith's song, Invisible Harmony, spread beyond Bellcrest's hallowed halls. Industry executives who had initially dismissed her began calling Professor Hayes, seeking the songwriter who had created something so undeniably magnetic. The first recording contract arrived within a month, offered without demands for image makeovers or style consultants. "Your authenticity is what sells you," the label had explained, having learned from the viral response to her performance. 3 months later, Invisible Harmony debuted on global charts, climbing steadily as listeners discovered what the Bellcrest audience had experienced: music that spoke to universal truths without artifice. Music industry analysts struggled to categorize her sound, eventually creating a new classification: authentic fusion. By the 6-month mark, Meredith's song had broken streaming records across platforms, her grandfather's guitar becoming instantly recognizable in music videos that maintained her unadorned style rather than transforming her into another polished product. Critics described her music as hauntingly familiar yet wholly original, like remembering something you never knew you'd forgotten. Julian's path transformed as well, his technically perfect compositions evolving as he began collaborating with Meredith, learning to find authenticity beneath his pristine technique. Their partnership, creative then personal, became the industry's most discussed evolution. Bellcrest Academy underwent its own transformation, establishing the Jackson Wilson Scholarship for musicians from non-traditional backgrounds, named after Meredith's grandfather. The velvet rope disappeared from its entrance, replaced by a simple plaque: "Music belongs to those who truly hear it." 1 year after being dismissed at Bellcrest's doors, Meredith Wilson returned as a guest lecturer, her grandfather's guitar still her only instrument, her faded jeans replaced not with designer labels, but with simple clothes of her own choosing. Students who had once mocked now filled seats, hoping to understand the authenticity that had propelled her beyond their carefully constructed careers. Alexandria, whose technical perfection had earned respect but never love from audiences, eventually sought Meredith's guidance. "I know every note," she confessed, "but no one feels anything when I play them." Meredith became what her grandfather had been for her: a guide to music's true purpose, not as a performance to be judged, but as a bridge between souls. Her songs topped charts not because they were perfect, but because they were true. Bellcrest's walls, once adorned only with the images of technically flawless performers, now displayed a simple black and white photograph: Meredith Wilson with her grandfather's guitar, a testament that music's power lies not in precision alone, but in the courage to be authentic in a world that rewards conformity. Meredith Wilson never needed their validation. She was the song that changed how they listened. The competition coordinator stepped onto the stage, her tailored suit a testament to Bellcrest's fixation on appearances. "Our next performer," she announced with practiced neutrality that barely masked her skepticism, is Meredith Wilson. Her tone suggested an afterthought, a placeholder between significant talents. The audience's attention had already begun to drift. Several students checked their phones, others whispered about Julian's masterful performance, a few openly laughed as Meredith made her way to the center stage. The grand piano had been pushed aside. No one had imagined she would need it, leaving only a single chair and microphone stand. Conductor Reed made a show of consulting his watch, then exchanging a knowing glance with Dr. Winters, both clearly anticipating a brief and forgettable performance. Alexandria leaned toward her circle of admirers, whispering something that caused ripples of stifled laughter to spread through the first 3 rows. Blake Montgomery raised his phone, its camera focused on Meredith, his thumb hovering over the record button in anticipation of capturing something worthy of mockery. "This'll go viral for all the wrong reasons," he muttered to his companion, loud enough for those nearby to appreciate his wit. The auditorium's sophisticated lighting system, designed to complement each performer's unique presentation, remained in its basic configuration. No one had bothered to program a custom scheme for a contestant deemed unworthy of such consideration. Meredith adjusted the microphone's height, a movement that triggered a screech of feedback through the sound system. Several audience members winced dramatically, while a technician rolled his eyes, clearly blaming her rather than checking the equipment. "Technical skills start before you play a note," Dr. Winters remarked to her colleague, her voice precisely calibrated to carry to the front rows without appearing to project. Meredith settled into the chair, positioning her grandfather's guitar across her lap with a reverence that seemed out of place to those who saw only its worn appearance. She didn't introduce herself or her composition, a departure from competition protocol that triggered more whispers and raised eyebrows among the judges. Dr. Winters made a notation on her scoring tablet, clearly deducting points for failing. To follow proper performance etiquette. Professor Hayes, seated at the far end of the judges' table, watched with quiet intensity, his weathered hands clasped tightly before him. Meredith took a deep breath, her eyes closing briefly, seeming to retreat from the hostile environment into some private sanctuary. When they opened again, something had shifted in her demeanor, subtle but profound, as though the audience had ceased to exist and only the music mattered. Her fingers brushed the strings, not in a dramatic flourish, but with the intimate familiarity of greeting an old friend. The first notes emerged with crystalline clarity, floating into the cavernous space with an unexpected richness that caused several heads to lift in surprise. The composition began simply, deceptively so, a melody that felt both fresh and somehow timeless, like a folk tune that had always existed yet had never been heard before. Alexandria's smirk faltered slightly as she registered the unexpected, complexity hidden within the seemingly straightforward progression. Blake's finger remained poised above his phone's screen, his anticipated mockery momentarily forgotten as the melody expanded, revealing intricate layers that professional musicians in the audience immediately recognized as technically challenging, despite their apparent effortlessness. When Meredith began to sing, the transformation in the room became palpable. Her voice carried no artificial techniques, no obvious training in classical or contemporary styles, yet possessed a quality that demanded attention, not through power, but through authenticity. It was like hearing color in a world accustomed to grayscale. The lyrics spoke of ordinary moments rendered extraordinary through perspective, a simple story of perseverance transfigured into something universal. Each word carried weight without heaviness, meaning without pretension. Julian shifted in his seat, his expression transitioning from condescension to curiosity as he recognized storytelling that transcended technique. By the second verse, the livestream comments had shifted dramatically. "Who is she? appeared repeatedly alongside "This is incredible" and "I've never heard anything like this." Viewers began sharing the stream, causing the viewership to spike so dramatically that the Academy server momentarily struggled to keep pace. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere underwent its own transformation. Conductor Reed had stopped, checking his watch, his gaze now fixed on Meredith's hands as they coaxed impossibly complex harmonics from an instrument that, by all appearances, should have been incapable of such depth. Dr. Winters leaned forward, her critical expression replaced by professional confusion as she attempted to categorize what she was hearing. The composition defied conventional structure while simultaneously honoring musical fundamentals in a way that felt both revolutionary and deeply respectful of tradition. Meredith's performance, built not through volume or theatrics, but through emotional intensity. The chorus arrived not as a calculated climax, but as a natural evolution of the narrative, her voice finding notes between established tones, creating emotional textures that caused several audience members to discreetly wipe away unexpected tears. Blake lowered his phone entirely, the planned social media mockery forgotten as he found himself unexpectedly moved. Alexandria's fingers tightened around her armrest, her knuckles whitening as she recognized something beyond her careful training, something she had never managed to achieve despite years of technical perfection. The scoring system, calibrated to reward technical precision and compositional orthodoxy, began registering unprecedented numbers in categories like emotional resonance and originality. Professor Hayes watched the digital readout with quiet vindication, his faith in Meredith's gift justified with each climbing number. Julian's expression had transformed completely, the confident smirk replaced by something more complex, a recognition of artistry that transcended the boundaries of conventional training. His gaze never left Meredith, studying her with the intensity of someone discovering a new musical language. As Meredith moved into the bridge, she introduced a guitar technique that caused several instrumental instructors to exchange glances of professional bewilderment. Her fingers created percussive rhythms against the body of the guitar while simultaneously maintaining complex chord progressions, a technique that appeared improvised yet was executed with flawless precision. The digital scoring display continued its unprecedented climb. 9, 8 for technical innovation, 9 for compositional integrity, 10 for emotional communication. Numbers that the system rarely assigned individually, let alone in combination. In the third row, a renowned music producer who had come to scout Julian leaned forward, hastily activating the recording function on his phone, his expression intense with recognition of commercial potential beyond anything he had anticipated finding at a student competition. The final verse arrived with devastating emotional precision. Meredith's voice found a vulnerability that transformed the auditorium into an intimate space despite its size. The lyrics spoke to human fragility and resilience in terms so authentic that listeners felt seen rather than performed to. Several judges found themselves setting aside their tablets, abandoning evaluation in favor of experience. As she approached the final chorus, Meredith introduced a vocal harmony that seemed impossible for a single performer, a technique that caused the sound engineers to check their boards, convinced there must be some technical explanation for what they were hearing, but there was none. Just raw talent expressing itself with uninhibited authenticity. The final notes lingered in the space, sustained not through technical manipulation, but through perfect resonance with the auditorium's natural acoustics, as though the building itself had become an extension of the instrument. When silence finally returned, it carried a weight that no one moved to disturb. For 17 seconds, an eternity in performance terms, not a sound broke the perfect stillness. No cough, no shifting in seats, no whispered commentary, just collective recognition that something extraordinary had transpired. The digital display confirmed what everyone had witnessed, a cumulative score of 9. 92, not only surpassing Julian's near-perfect 9. 8, but establishing a new competition record by margins that seemed statistically impossible. The first response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Eliza Winters, who had most openly dismissed Meredith's presence, rose slowly to her feet, her academic reserve cracking to reveal genuine emotion. She began to applaud, the sound sharp and definitive in the silence. Professor Hayes joined immediately, tears streaming unabashedly down his weathered face. Then came the technical staff, the sound engineers, the lighting designers, the professionals who recognize craftsmanship beyond politics. The students followed in waves, their earlier mockery transformed by authentic recognition. Even Alexandria stood, her perfect posture for once expressing something genuine rather than calculated. Blake's phone remained lowered, recording forgotten, as he experienced rather than documented. Julian was among the last to rise, his expression complex with emotions that shifted visibly across his features: shock, recognition, respect, and something deeper that resembled awakening. When he finally joined the applause, it was with an intensity that suggested not just acknowledgement, but personal revelation. Conductor Reed remained seated until the absolute last moment, when professional responsibility overcame personal prejudice. His applause came reluctantly at first, then with growing conviction as he registered that he had witnessed something that would be remembered long after his career had ended. The live stream had exploded, comments flooding in faster than the system could display them, viewership numbers climbing toward record territory as viewers shared the performance across platforms with messages like "You have to see this" and "Music that changes everything." Through it all, Meredith remained centered in her simplicity. She didn't bow dramatically or affect false modesty. She simply inclined her head in acknowledgement, gathered her grandfather's guitar, and moved to leave the stage with the same quiet dignity with which she had arrived. It was then that Professor Hayes stepped forward, his frail frame somehow commanding, as he raised a hand to pause the proceedings. "We have witnessed something rare today," he said, his voice carrying decades of musical authority. Not merely talent, which is common enough, but authentic artistic voice, which is the rarest gift of all. The crowd fell silent, recognizing the gravitas of his assessment. Hayes continued, emotion making his voice tremble slightly. "I have taught at this institution for 43 years. I have seen technical brilliance and compositional sophistication, but I have rarely encountered truth in its purest musical form until today." Conductor Reed cleared his throat, reclaiming his authority as head judge. "The scores speak for themselves," he announced, gesturing toward the digital display where Meredith's unprecedented numbers still glowed. "Ms. Wilson's composition will be featured in our annual showcase and forwarded to our industry partners with the Academy's highest recommendation." The audience erupted again, the applause now tinged with the electric energy of witnessing history. Students who had documented Meredith's entrance with mockery now fought to capture her triumph, social media suddenly flooding with messages like "I was there when Meredith Wilson changed music" and "Remember this name." As the formal announcement concluded, Meredith finally spoke, her voice carrying the same authentic quality that had distinguished her singing. "Music isn't about perfection," she said simply. "It's about connection. My grandfather taught me that a wrong note played with honest emotion will always mean more than perfect technique without heart." The words landed with particular weight in an institution built on technical excellence. Several instructors exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing an implicit challenge to pedagogical approaches that prioritized precision over expression. As Meredith moved through the crowd toward the exit, the parting of bodies resembled something almost ceremonial. Not the earlier avoidance stemming from disdain, but a new deference born of respect. Phones captured her passage, but the earlier mockery had transformed to reverence. Julian Hayes stood directly in her path, his carefully cultivated stage presence momentarily abandoned as he searched for words adequate to the moment. "I've never been more wrong about anything in my life," he said finally, loud enough for nearby microphones to capture. "What you just created wasn't just music, it was truth." The crowd watched, collectively holding their breath as these two contrasting figures, the polished industry heir and the authentic outsider, regarded each other across what suddenly seemed less a social divide than different musical philosophies. Meredith's response came with the same genuineness that had defined her performance. "There's truth in your music too," she said. "It's just waiting for you to find it beneath all that training." The statement might have seemed presumptuous coming from anyone else, but delivered in Meredith's unassuming tone, it landed as an invitation rather than criticism. Julian's expression shifted through surprise to thoughtful consideration, something awakening in him that decades of professional grooming had nearly extinguished. "I'd like to understand how you approach composition," he said, his rehearsed charm replaced by genuine curiosity. "Would you consider talking about it, perhaps over coffee?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with significance beyond social pleasantries. It represented a bridge between worlds, the established industry acknowledging something valuable in what it had previously dismissed. Meredith's smile, when it came, transformed her features with a warmth that caught Julian. Unexpectedly, "Coffee sounds like a place to start," she replied, the simplicity of her response carrying neither triumph nor concession, just openness to possibility. The exchange, captured on dozens of phones and broadcast through the live stream, quickly became as viral as the performance itself. Comments multiplied. The Prince of Bellcrest humbled, and two worlds colliding, and this is how music evolves. The aftermath unfolded in ripples through the auditorium. Alexandria Walsh retreated to the practice rooms, her perfect technique, suddenly feeling hollow as she struggled through repeated attempts to infuse her performances with the authenticity she had witnessed. Blake Montgomery deleted the mocking content he had planned to post, his social media presence uncharacteristically silent as he processed what he had experienced. Dr. Winters approached Professor Hayes in the judges' lounge, her academic reserve, cracking enough to admit, "I have never been so professionally wrong. Where did you find her?" Hayes's response carried the quiet satisfaction of vindication. "I didn't find her. I simply listened when others were too busy judging." The competition coordinator, who had announced Meredith with such dismissive neutrality, now scrambled to arrange post-performance interviews, suddenly aware that her connection to this emerging talent could prove professionally significant. The retired virtuoso who had most vocally questioned Meredith's presence now positioned himself strategically for introduction, his earlier criticism conveniently forgotten. But Meredith moved through the transformed landscape with the same unpretentious dignity she had shown from the beginning, neither gloating in her triumph nor affecting false modesty. When asked by a student how she had achieved such emotional authenticity, her answer came with characteristic simplicity. "I didn't try to impress anyone. I just told the truth as I know it." The competition's social media accounts, which had earlier amplified the mockery directed at Meredith, now highlighted her victory with the enthusiasm of early discovery. The hashtag #YourMeredithWilson began trending regionally, then nationally, the performance clip accumulating views at a rate that threatened to crash the Academy's servers. Industry professionals who had attended solely to scout Julian now conducted hushed phone conversations in the hallways, agents and producers recognizing potential beyond institutional pedigree. One veteran A&R executive was overheard saying, She's what the industry has been missing, authenticity that can't be manufactured. As the formal proceedings concluded, Meredith retrieved her worn guitar case from beneath her assigned seat. The stickers and electrical tape that had earlier drawn mockery now photographed with reverent attention to detail. Students who had sneered at her faded jeans now studied her aesthetic as though it contained some secret key to artistic authenticity. The transformation extended beyond the competition's immediate circle. The livestream comments reflected a hunger for musical genuineness that transcended genre preferences. I don't even like acoustic music, but this made me cry. And finally, something real in an industry of plastic. And where can I hear more? Meredith's mother, watching from her hospital bed, wiped tears of vindication as the phone beside her began lighting up with messages from relatives and friends who had recognized her daughter in the now viral performance. The nurse attending her smiled in confusion, asking, "Is that your daughter everyone's talking about online?" Back at Bellcrest, Julian Hayes experienced his own transformation. For the first time in his career, he had encountered music that made his own compositions, technically brilliant as they were, feel somehow incomplete. As he watched Meredith prepare to leave, something compelled him to follow, to extend their conversation beyond the perfunctory exchange on stage. He caught up with her in the marble-floored lobby, where students who had earlier formed an impenetrable social barrier now parted to allow him passage. "Meredith," he called, his voice stripped of its practiced performance quality. When she turned, he found himself momentarily at a loss, a rare occurrence for someone raised to command every room. "Your song," he began, then paused, searching for words adequate to the experience. It wasn't just beautiful, it was necessary, like it needed to exist in the world. He gestured vaguely, uncharacteristically inarticulate. "I've never created anything that felt that essential." Meredith regarded him without the awe his family name typically commanded, seeing not the industry heir, but simply another musician struggling with artistic truth. "Music isn't about being impressive," she said, adjusting her guitar case strap. "It's about being honest. Sometimes that's harder when you have every advantage." The observation might have seemed presumptuous from anyone else, but delivered in Meredith's unassuming tone, it landed as insight rather than criticism. Julian found himself nodding, recognition dawning. "I've spent my entire life trying to live up to my family's legacy," he admitted. "Maybe that's why my music sounds perfect, but feels empty." Around them, the Bellcrest lobby buzzed with activity, but a small bubble of authentic conversation had formed amid the institutional politics and social positioning. Professor Hayes observed from a distance, his weathered face reflecting satisfaction as he witnessed the beginning of something significant. "Would you consider collaborating sometime?" Julian asked, the question emerging with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Not now, obviously, but when you're ready. I think we might create something important together." Meredith's smile came again, transforming her features in a way that Julian found inexplicably compelling. "I'd like that," she replied simply. "Music is better when it bridges different worlds." As Meredith finally departed through the grand entrance, where hours earlier she'd been stopped and questioned, the security staff who had initially regarded her with suspicion now held the door with deferential respect. Outside, a small gathering of students had formed, whispering as she passed, no longer in mockery, but in the particular reverence reserved for witnessing emerging legend. The afternoon sunlight caught her chestnut hair as she descended the stone steps, illuminating her in what would become an iconic image when captured by a photography student. The antithesis of Bellcrest's polished promotional materials, yet ultimately more compelling in its authenticity. Behind her, within the hallowed halls of Bellcrest Academy, conversations had already begun that would ultimately transform the institution. Dr. Winters and conductor Reed conferred in hushed tones about curriculum adjustments and admission criteria that might better identify genuine artistic voice alongside technical proficiency. The competition coordinator placed an urgent call to the Academy's marketing department, recognizing the promotional potential in Meredith's story. "We need to position ourselves as having discovered her," she insisted, professional instinct overriding her earlier dismissal. This could redefine Bellcrest's public image. In the student lounge, heated debates erupted about authenticity versus training, about institutional pedigree versus raw talent. Alexandria Walsh found herself uncharacteristically silent during these discussions, her certainties shaken by what she had witnessed. Blake Montgomery, typically dominant in social discourse, contributed little. His phone for once set aside as he processed the unexpected challenge to his musical worldview. Julian retreated to his private practice room, where he sat before his custom piano for nearly an hour without playing a note. When he finally placed his hands on the keys, the composition that emerged bore little resemblance to his previous work. Simpler in structure, but more complex in emotional texture. Less technically impressive, but somehow more honest. As evening fell, Professor Hayes sat alone in the now empty auditorium, reviewing the recordings of the day's performances. When he reached Meredith's, he paused the playback after the first verse, a smile of quiet satisfaction crossing his weathered features. "This," he murmured to the empty space, "is what music is supposed to do." That night, as Bellcrest's halls grew quiet, the wider world was just beginning to respond. Music blogs published hurried analyses of the Bellcrest phenomenon. Industry forums buzzed with speculation about the mysterious songwriter who had emerged from nowhere. Streaming platforms reported unusual search volume for Meredith Willson, despite her having no published catalogue. By midnight, the performance clip had accumulated over 1 million views across platforms, comment sections filled with variations on a single theme. This is what music has been missing. A&R executives from 3 major labels had already dispatched emails to Bellcrest's administration requesting contact information. Their standard procedures accelerated by recognition of something increasingly rare in the industry: authentic voice with commercial potential. Meredith herself remained unaware of much of this activity. In her modest apartment across town, she sat by her mother's hospital bed, guitar across her lap, playing the same song that had transformed her life hours earlier. In this intimate setting, without auditorium acoustics or professional recording equipment, the music carried the same emotional truth, a testament to its genuine nature. Her mother reached for her hand as the final notes faded. "Your grandfather always said you had a gift that couldn't be taught," she said softly. "Today, the world finally heard what we've always known." Meredith nodded, her expression serene despite the day's emotional turbulence. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," she said. "I just wanted to honor what he taught me. That music isn't about being seen, it's about being heard." As she carefully returned her grandfather's guitar to its worn case, her phone illuminated with notifications, hundreds of them, from social media mentions to industry inquiries to messages from long silent classmates, suddenly eager to reconnect. Meredith regarded the device with mild surprise, then set it aside, unanswered. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The inevitable pressure to commodify her gift, to package her authenticity for consumption, to transform her organic talent into marketable product. But tonight, in the quiet space between existing as an unknown and emerging as a discovery, Meredith Willson remained simply herself, a musician who had told the truth through song and found that the world had been waiting to hear it. The guitar case closed with a soft click, the sound insignificant yet somehow final, the period at the end of one chapter and the first mark on a fresh page. Whatever came next would be written in a voice that remained authentically her own, regardless of the industry that now eagerly awaited her contribution. Outside her window, the city continued its usual rhythms, unaware that its musical landscape had been irrevocably altered. Within Bellcrest's hallowed halls, Julian Hayes sat at his piano, still searching for the honesty that Meredith had demonstrated so effortlessly. And across the digital landscape, countless listeners replayed a performance that reminded them why they had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for its technical perfection, but for its capacity to speak truth that transcended words. The night deepened, but Meredith's song echoed on, finding its way into headphones and car speakers and practice rooms, a ripple effect that would continue expanding long after the initial splash had subsided. Proof that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with the softest voices, and that authenticity, once expressed, creates its own inevitable resonance. The morning after Meredith's performance, Bellcrest Academy awoke to a transformed reality. The competition results dominated industry news, with headlines ranging from "Unknown songwriter shatters Bellcrest records" to "Musical authenticity breaks through elite barriers." The Academy's phone lines jammed with media inquiries and industry professionals seeking the woman who had created what one prominent critic was already calling the most honest musical expression of the decade. Dean Margaret Foster, who had been traveling during the competition, returned to find her institution at the center of an unexpected storm. Her immaculate office became command central as she summoned the competition judges to explain how an unknown outsider had become overnight musical royalty through their platform. "This was not how we planned to position this year's competition," she stated, her silver hair arranged in its usual perfect coif, her tailored suit an armor of institutional authority. "Bellcrest cultivates excellence through tradition. We don't discover hidden talents. We refine established potential." Professor Hayes sat calmly amid his colleagues' discomfort. "Perhaps that's been our limitation," he suggested, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of teaching experience. "We've become so focused on polishing what's already recognized that we've forgotten how to recognize what's genuine." The dean's expression tightened. "Richard, your sentimentality is touching but ultimately irrelevant to our brand positioning. The question now is how we leverage this anomaly to reinforce our institutional prestige." Conductor Reed cleared his throat. "With respect, Margaret, I believe you're missing the significance of what occurred yesterday. Ms. Wilson didn't just win our competition. She revealed the limitations of how we define musical excellence." The silence that followed carried more weight than any immediate response could have. The dean studied the faces of her most respected faculty members, recognizing an unprecedented unity among individuals who typically engaged in subtle competition for institutional influence. "You believe this girl is genuinely exceptional?" she asked finally. "I believe," Hayes replied, "that Meredith Wilson represents what music should always have been. Emotional truth expressed through technical means rather than technical prowess masquerading as artistic expression." The dean's assistant interrupted with news that representatives from 3 major labels had arrived without appointments, all requesting information about Meredith. The institution that had nearly turned her away now found itself functioning as unwitting gatekeeper to her burgeoning career. Across town, Meredith woke in her modest apartment to a phone that had finally stopped working, its battery drained by thousands of notifications, messages, and alerts that had accumulated overnight. Her mother, released from the hospital that morning, sat at their small kitchen table, reviewing printouts of emails the hospital staff had helped her gather. "Meridian Records wants to offer you a development deal," she said, wonder coloring her voice. "Harmony Entertainment is proposing a 3-album contract. There's interest from film composers, independent labels, and," She paused, reading more. Carefully, Julian Hayes wants to meet for coffee at noon. Meredith glanced up from preparing her mother's recovery medication. Julian's message is the only one that doesn't seem to want something from me, she observed quietly. She plugged in her phone, watching with mild detachment as notifications resumed their cascade. Among the industry inquiries and media requests appeared messages from Bellcrest students who had openly mocked her just yesterday, their tone now transformed to eager camaraderie, as though they had always recognized her talent. "It's strange," she said, setting water to boil for tea. "Yesterday, I wasn't good enough to acknowledge. Today, I'm apparently too important to ignore." Her mother studied her daughter's composed features. "Are you going to meet with any of these people?" Meredith considered the question, her gaze drifting to her grandfather's guitar case propped in the corner. "I think I'll start with Julian," she said finally. "At least his interest seems genuine. The rest feel like they're rushing to claim discovery of something they initially dismissed." As the morning progressed, Bellcrest Academy transformed into an unlikely epicenter of music industry activity. The administration, recognizing an unprecedented opportunity, hastily organized a press conference to present their competition winner, despite having done everything possible to marginalize her participation. Just a day earlier, Alexandria Walsh sat in her private practice room, repeatedly attempting to infuse her technically perfect performance with the emotional authenticity she had witnessed in Meredith's work. After 2 hours of frustrated effort, she set aside her instrument and stared through the window at the garden, where students gathered between classes. "I don't understand," she admitted to her vocal coach. "I've mastered every technique. My pitch is perfect. My range exceeds competition requirements. Why doesn't it connect the way her music did?" The coach, a veteran performer whose career had peaked and faded decades earlier, considered the question with rare honesty. "Perhaps because you've spent years learning to perform rather than express," she suggested. "Technique communicates skill. Authenticity communicates humanity." "Can authenticity be learned?" Alexandria asked, the question emerging with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Not learned," the coach replied, "remembered." At precisely noon, Meredith entered the small cafe 6 blocks from Bellcrest's campus, a deliberate choice that situated their meeting outside the academy's sphere of influence. Julian already waited, having arrived unfashionably early, his usual entourage noticeably absent. He rose as she approached, his practiced charm temporarily abandoned in favor of genuine nervousness. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out a chair with automatic courtesy. "I half expected you to ignore my message, given everything that must be happening." Meredith set her grandfather's guitar case beside her chair, its presence between them a tangible reminder of their different musical origins. "Your message was the only one that seemed interested in me rather than what I might represent," she replied, accepting the menu he offered. That seemed worth responding to. Julian studied her across the table, not with the evaluating gaze of a competitor, but with genuine curiosity. "How did you do it?" he asked finally. "Create something so necessary?" "I've been composing since I could reach a keyboard. I've had every advantage, every resource, every opportunity. But I've never written anything that felt as essential as your song." Meredith considered the question while ordering herbal tea, giving it the serious reflection it deserved. "I think," she said finally, "it's because I never learned to separate the musician from the person. My grandfather taught me that music isn't something you perform, it's something you reveal." Julian absorbed this, turning the concept over in his mind. At Bellcrest, we're taught the opposite, that performance is about creating distance between yourself and the audience through technical mastery, control rather than connection. That explains a lot, Meredith noted without judgment. "Your composition was technically flawless, but I couldn't hear you in it." The observation might have offended him yesterday. Today, it felt like a doorway to something he had been unconsciously seeking. Their conversation deepened as the afternoon progressed, evolving from professional curiosity to genuine exchange, as Julian gradually abandoned the persona that had defined his musical identity. 3 tables away, unnoticed amid the lunchtime crowd, a music blogger captured their interaction on her phone, the accompanying post already taking shape in her mind. Hayes Dynasty Heir and Bellcrest Phenomenon, music's next power collaboration. Back at Bellcrest, Dean Foster's hastily arranged press conference proceeded without its intended centerpiece. "We seem to have a scheduling miscommunication with Ms. Wilson," she explained to the assembled media, her practiced smile tightening at the corners. "However, we're delighted to share Bellcrest's long-standing commitment to identifying exceptional talent, regardless of background." A veteran music journalist raised her hand. "Is it accurate that Ms. Wilson was initially prevented from entering the competition venue and was mocked by students and faculty prior to her performance?" The question hung in the air like an unexpected chord change, disrupting the dean's carefully composed narrative. Before she could formulate a response, Professor Hayes stepped forward, his academic reserve giving way to ethical clarity. "Yes," he stated simply. "Bellcrest failed to recognize Meredith Wilson's exceptional gift because it arrived in packaging we weren't programmed to value. That failure reflects institutional blindness that deserves acknowledgement rather than convenient revision." The dean's expression could have frozen the auditorium, but Hayes continued undeterred. "If Bellcrest wishes to claim any association with Ms. Wilson's extraordinary talent, it should begin with institutional honesty about how we nearly excluded her voice completely." His statement transformed the press narrative instantly, journalists abandoning prepared questions to explore this unexpected thread of institutional self-criticism. From her office, Dr. Winters watched the live stream with a complex mixture of professional discomfort and reluctant respect for Hayes's integrity. As afternoon faded toward evening, Meredith and Julian remained deep in conversation, their coffee cups long empty, the cafe's staff working around them with the particular consideration reserved for those amid important exchange. Their discussion had evolved from music theory to personal history, each sharing the influences that had shaped their artistic development. "My family has produced 3 generations of successful composers," Julian explained, tracing patterns on the tabletop. "My grandfather wrote for orchestras, my father for film, and I was expected to find my place within that legacy. Music was never a choice, it was an inheritance." Meredith listened without interruption, recognizing beneath his privilege a different kind of constraint. "That sounds lonely," she offered, the observation simple but perceptive. Julian looked up, momentarily startled by her insight. "I've never thought of it that way, but yes, expectations can be as limiting as lack of opportunity, just in different ways. My grandfather used to say that true music lives in the space between what you've learned and what you've lived," Meredith said, her fingers unconsciously mimicking chord positions on the tabletop. "Maybe that's what's been missing for you, the freedom to live your own experience rather than continuing someone else's story." Something shifted in Julian's expression, a recognition that transcended their discussion of music theory. "Would you play something?" he asked suddenly. "Not for anyone else, just and as part of our conversation. I want to understand how you approach creation when there's no audience to impress." Meredith considered the request, then nodded, opening her grandfather's case and removing the instrument without self-consciousness. The cafe patrons turned in surprise as she positioned the guitar, but she remained focused on Julian, creating an intimate space amid the public setting. The melody she played was not her competition piece, but something new, created in the moment, reflecting their conversation with an emotional honesty that made technical considerations secondary. She didn't perform for the inadvertent audience, but shared directly with Julian, the music becoming a continuation of their dialogue. As the final notes faded, Julian's expression reflected transformation rather than mere appreciation. "That wasn't a song," he said softly. "It was a conversation." Meredith nodded. "That's what music is supposed to be." The cafe had fallen silent, patrons and staff alike caught in the authenticity of the moment. As awareness of their surroundings returned, scattered applause broke out, quickly hushed as people recognized the intrusion into something that had not been intended as performance. Julian leaned forward, his voice low with newfound clarity. "I want to try something different with my music, something honest. Would you consider collaborating? Not for promotion or publicity, but because I think together we might create something that matters." Meredith returned her guitar to its case, considering his proposal with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I'd like that," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them," Julian replied without hesitation. "We work as equals, regardless of your family's connections. We create what feels true, not what seems marketable. And we begin by acknowledging that neither of us has all the answers. You have technical knowledge I could benefit from, and I have perspective that might help you." Julian extended his hand across the table. "Partners, then." As their agreement solidified, neither noticed the woman approaching their table. Eliza Winters, her academic formality somewhat diminished by the uncertainty in her expression. "Ms. Wilson," she began, then paused, visibly struggling with unaccustomed humility. "I owe you an apology. My dismissal of your talent was not only unprofessional, but revealed significant limitations in how I evaluate musical worth." Meredith regarded her former critic without resentment. "We often find what we're looking for rather than what's actually there," she observed. "That's true for all of us." Dr. Winters nodded, accepting both the implicit forgiveness and the gentle wisdom. "Bellcrest is holding a reception this evening to celebrate the competition results. Your presence would be meaningful, not for the institution's image, but for the students who might learn from your example." Julian watched this exchange with newfound perspective, recognizing the subtle power dynamics that had shifted so dramatically in 24 hours. Meredith considered the invitation, her gaze drifting between her grandfather's guitar case and Julian's expectant expression. "I'll come," she agreed finally. "Not as a trophy to be displayed, but as a musician among musicians. Sometimes barriers need to fall from both sides." The reception that evening transformed Bellcrest's usual formal gathering into something unexpectedly genuine. Students who had mockingly documented Meredith's arrival now approached with awkward apologies and sincere questions about her compositional process. Faculty members whose expertise had been challenged by her unorthodox success engaged in passionate discussions about redefining evaluation criteria. Alexandria Walsh approached as Meredith stood conversing with Professor Hayes, her perfect posture for once betraying uncertainty. "Your song has been playing in my head since yesterday," she admitted. "I've been trying to understand what makes it so affecting." Meredith's response carried no triumph, only genuine engagement. Maybe because it wasn't trying to impress you, just to connect with you. Alexandria absorbed this, years of competitive training momentarily suspended. "Could you show me, not the notes or technique, but how to find that authenticity?" The request, coming from the student who had most openly mocked her, might have justified rejection. Instead, Meredith nodded. Authentic expression isn't taught, it's uncovered, but yes, I'd be happy to explore that with you. Across the room, Conductor Reed observed this exchange, his professional skepticism giving way to recognition that something fundamental was shifting within the institution he had helped shape. He approached Dean Foster, who maintained diplomatic composure despite the evening having evolved far beyond her controlling influence. "We need to reconsider our approach," he stated without preamble. "Not abandon our standards, but expand them. To recognize forms of musical excellence we've been systematically overlooking." The Dean's response came with surprising candor. "This isn't just about music, is it, Nicholas?" "No," he acknowledged. "It's about whether institutions like Bellcrest exist to preserve traditions or to nurture genuine artistic voice, even when that voice challenges our assumptions about what constitutes excellence." As their discussion continued, Julian navigated through former admirers toward Meredith, their earlier coffee conversation having established a connection that transcended the social dynamics swirling around them. He carried a folder containing composition sketches started during the hours after they had parted, the beginning of something that departed significantly from his previous work. "It's rough," he admitted as he showed her, "and probably technically flawed, but it's the first time I've written something that feels like me rather than what's expected of Julian Hayes." Meredith studied the notation, recognizing beneath the technical elements a genuine attempt at emotional honesty. "This is a beginning," she said, her approval clearly meaning more to him than the competition judges' scores ever had. Professor Hayes observed them from across the room, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. The elderly composition teacher who had invited Meredith against institutional resistance now watched as his faith in authentic musical voice found vindication not merely in her success, but in its catalytic effect on the next generation of musicians. As the evening progressed, industry representatives circulated with calculated casualness, each hoping to establish connection with the phenomenon that had emerged so unexpectedly. Meredith navigated these approaches with natural grace, neither seeking the spotlight nor avoiding the opportunities that might allow her music to reach those who needed to hear it. 3 weeks later, Meredith's competition piece, now titled Invisible Harmony, received its first professional recording in a session that broke with industry convention. Rather than isolating her in a sterile booth, the producer, a veteran who had worked with legendary songwriters, created an intimate setting that preserved the authenticity of her performance. Julian attended not as heir to a music empire, but as collaborator and friend, his perspective proving valuable as they navigated the technical aspects of capturing something inherently organic. The recording, released initially as a digital single, without marketing fanfare, spread through listener recommendation rather than promotional campaigns. Music supervisors discovered it through personal playlists rather than industry showcases, leading to unexpected placement in a documentary film whose director described it as the emotional truth we've been searching for. 6 weeks after her Bellcrest performance, Meredith signed a recording contract that reflected her priorities rather than industry conventions, maintaining creative control, establishing a scholarship for musicians from non-traditional backgrounds, and securing distribution without sacrificing artistic integrity. The negotiation process, normally contentious, proceeded with unusual cooperation as executives recognized that standard approaches risked compromising the very authenticity that made her valuable. Julian's artistic evolution continued in parallel, his family's initial concern about his experimental phase giving way to reluctant recognition that his collaboration with Meredith had unlocked something genuine in his composition. Their first co-written piece debuted at an industry showcase, its reception confirming that their partnership transcended novelty to create something musically significant. 3 months after the competition that had transformed both their lives, Meredith returned to Bellcrest Academy, not as visitor, but as guest lecturer in a new program developed by Professor Hayes and, surprisingly, Dr. Winters. Authentic voice in contemporary composition. Enrolled students selected not merely for technical proficiency, but for creative potential, regardless of background or formal training. Alexandria Walsh attended these sessions not as privileged star, but as genuine student, her technical excellence now serving authentic expression rather than mere display. Blake Montgomery, whose mockery had been most public, approached Meredith after her third lecture, the humility in his expression, suggesting lessons learned beyond music theory. "I didn't just misjudge your talent," he admitted. "I think I've been misjudging what music is supposed to be." Bellcrest itself underwent institutional soul-searching, its century-old approach to musical education expanding to incorporate what Dean Foster reluctantly termed the Wilson perspective. Recognition that technical excellence without emotional authenticity remained ultimately hollow. The academy that had nearly rejected Meredith's presence now featured her approach in recruitment materials, though she declined offers to become its public face. Invisible Harmony continued its unexpected journey, crossing genre boundaries and demographic divisions. Stream counts climbed not through algorithmic promotion, but through human connection, listeners sharing a song that somehow spoke to universal experience through deeply personal expression. Music critics struggled to categorize it, eventually surrendering to descriptions like authentically uncategorizable and genuinely original. 6 months after the competition, Meredith's song reached global charts, its popularity defying industry patterns. Unlike manufactured hits that flared bright and faded quickly, Invisible Harmony built sustainable momentum through genuine listener engagement, its streaming numbers reflecting repeat experiences rather than passive consumption. Julian and Meredith's creative partnership deepened into personal connection, their different backgrounds proving complementary rather than conflicting. His technical knowledge enhanced her intuitive approach. Her authentic perspective liberated his controlled expression. Together, they created music that neither could have produced alone, a partnership based not on industry calculation, but on genuine artistic resonance. A year after being dismissed at Bellcrest's entrance, Meredith Wilson returned as keynote speaker for the annual commencement ceremony, an honor typically reserved for established industry legends rather than emerging artists. Her address, characteristically concise, distilled the journey that had transformed both her life and the institution itself. "Music isn't a competition," she told the graduating class. "It's a conversation between artist and listener, between tradition and innovation, between what we've learned and what we've lived. Technical excellence matters, but authenticity matters more. Perfect notes without honest emotion are just organized sound, but honest emotion expressed through devoted craft becomes something necessary, art that doesn't just impress but transforms." As she concluded her address, Professor Hayes watched from the faculty section, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. The composition teacher who had recognized authentic voice beneath institutional prejudice now witnessed his faith, validated not merely in Meredith's success, but in the transformation her presence had catalyzed within Bellcrest itself. The academy that had nearly rejected her now displayed her guitar case in a special exhibition alongside instruments played by its most distinguished alumni. The case's worn leather and faded stickers, once objects of mockery, now represented a visual reminder that excellence comes in unexpected packages and that authentic voice, once expressed, creates its own undeniable resonance. Meredith Wilson never sought validation from the institution that had initially dismissed her, but her presence had transformed it nonetheless, not through confrontation, but through the irrefutable power of authentic expression. Her music topped global charts, not because she had conquered the industry, but because she had remained true to her grandfather's teaching, that music belongs not to those with perfect technique, but to those with the courage to reveal genuine emotion through devoted craft. Her legacy at Bellcrest wasn't measured in trophies or accolades, but in the fundamental questions her presence had forced the institution to confront about the nature of musical excellence. The academy that had once defined success through rigid conformity to established standards now encouraged students to develop unique voice alongside technical skill, a transformation that would influence generations of musicians beyond Meredith's own story. As evening fell on commencement day, Meredith and Julian walked the academy grounds, their conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of genuine connection. The setting sun illuminated Bellcrest's stone facade, the historical building now housing a more expansive vision of musical education than its founders might have imagined. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you first walked through those doors? Julian asked, gesturing toward the entrance where she had once been stopped and questioned. Meredith's smile carried the same authenticity that had transformed her. Music from personal expression to global phenomenon. I wasn't thinking about outcomes, she replied. I was just trying to honor what my grandfather taught me, that music isn't about where you come from or who recognizes your worth. It's about having the courage to speak truth through melody and trusting that genuine expression will find its way to those who need to hear it. As they continued their walk, the sound of students practicing drifted through open windows, some following traditional approaches, others exploring new possibilities inspired by the barriers Meredith had helped dismantle. Her single song had done more than top global charts. It had expanded the very definition of what constituted musical excellence, creating space for authentic voices that might otherwise have remained unheard. Meredith Wilson never needed institutional validation to confirm what her grandfather had recognized years earlier, that her gift lay not in technical perfection, but in emotional truth. Yet the academy that had nearly dismissed her now celebrated her approach, its transformed perspective ensuring that future students with non-traditional backgrounds might find their authentic voices welcomed rather than rejected. Her legacy wasn't built on conquest, but on conversation between different musical worlds, between tradition and innovation, between the established and the emerging. And in that ongoing dialogue, something new continued to evolve. Music that served not merely as entertainment or showcase, but as essential communication between human experiences. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.